Open a textbook on prehistoric dentistry, and you'll find a genuinely strange fact sitting right at the surface. Researchers studying calcified dental plaque scrape it off the teeth of 34 prehistoric skeletons found that hunter-gatherers, people living thousands of years before toothbrushes, floss, or fluoride existed anywhere on Earth, had cavity rates somewhere between 1 and 5%. Modern industrial societies, with all our dental technology and twice-yearly cleanings, sit somewhere between 10 and 85%. That's not a typo, and it's not a small gap either. People with zero dental hygiene whatsoever, no brushing, no flossing, no mouthwash, no fluoride toothpaste of any kind, were walking around with mouths in genuinely better shape by this one specific measure than people today who own electric toothbrushes and a drawer full of mouthwash in 17 different flavors to choose from. So did ancient humans actually have better teeth than we do? The honest answer is genuinely more complicated and considerably more interesting than a simple yes, and it involves a hidden ecosystem of bacteria that quietly turned hostile the moment humans started farming, a Pakistani cemetery containing the oldest known dental drill holes on the entire planet, Neanderthals using actual toothpicks to manage genuine, sustained pain thousands of generations before anyone invented modern dentistry, and a fossil skull discovered with a dental condition that completely demolishes the popular myth that ancient mouths were somehow a flawless paradise compared to our own. Let's start with the headline finding, because it's genuinely one of the more famous discoveries in the entire field of ancient dental research, and for very good reason. In 2013, a research team led by Alan Cooper, director of the Australian Centre for Ancient DNA, examined calcified plaque preserved on prehistoric teeth and tracked exactly how oral bacteria changed across thousands of years of human history. What they found, published in the journal Nature Genetics, was a striking and remarkably consistent pattern. Hunter-gatherers, eating a diet built primarily around meat, vegetables, and nuts, carried a relatively balanced, comparatively healthy community of oral bacteria living in their mouths. But the moment agricultural populations began to expand across the landscape, something changed dramatically and permanently inside the human mouth. Specific strains of bacteria that were unusually efficient at metabolizing carbohydrates began to outcompete other, friendlier bacterial strains that had previously dominated, and the overall ecosystem inside human mouths tipped sharply toward disease almost overnight in evolutionary terms. Huge amounts of gum disease, Cooper noted plainly in interviews discussing the findings, and cavities start cropping up. This wasn't a slow, gradual drift unfolding over tens of thousands of years. It was a fairly abrupt shift tracking almost exactly with the arrival of farming, grain cultivation, and the steady, repeated daily exposure to starch and sugar that farming brought along with it as an unavoidable side effect. This finding lines up neatly with broader archaeological surveys of cavity rates measured across different subsistence strategies practiced throughout human history. Hunter-gatherer populations relying on diets genuinely low in fermentable carbohydrates consistently show cavity rates clustering somewhere in that 1 to 5% range mentioned earlier, a remarkably tight and consistent figure across multiple unrelated populations studied independently. Agricultural populations, by contrast, including many modern industrial societies built around processed grains and refined sugar consumed multiple times a day, show cavity rates that can climb as high as 85% in some studied groups, an almost unbelievable range when placed directly next to the hunter-gatherer figures. The basic underlying mechanism is straightforward once you understand the relevant biology involved. A bacterium called Streptococcus mutans, one of the primary culprits behind tooth decay in the modern mouth, thrives specifically and disproportionately on sugars and refined carbohydrates. It metabolizes them efficiently and produces acid as a direct byproduct. And that acid is precisely what slowly erodes tooth enamel over time and creates the exact conditions needed for a cavity to eventually form. Hunter-gatherer diets simply didn't provide this particular bacterium with much fuel to work with on any given day. Agricultural diets built heavily and repeatedly around starchy grains gave it an absolute feast instead, served up multiple times daily, every single day for the rest of recorded human history that followed. But cavities are only one piece of the larger dental health story, And focusing exclusively on them creates a genuinely misleading overall picture of what ancient mouths actually looked like day to day, because hunter-gatherers were dealing with an entirely different category of dental problem that modern people almost never have to experience firsthand: catastrophic, relentless tooth wear accumulating steadily across a lifetime. Researchers studying ancient hunter-gatherer dentition have repeatedly documented severe attrition, the gradual mechanical grinding down of tooth surfaces through sheer repeated use over decades, far beyond anything routinely seen in modern populations eating softer, more heavily processed food. This wasn't simply a passive byproduct of chewing tough meat and fibrous wild plants either, although that contributed plenty on its own without any additional help. Ancient humans regularly and deliberately used their teeth as functional tools, a practice well documented across multiple distinct populations and time periods stretching back tens of thousands of years. Modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Greenland Inuit, studied specifically for exactly this reason by anthropologists, use their front teeth to soften raw seal hide before working it into usable material, essentially turning their own mouths into a piece of built-in leather working equipment carried around at all times. And the resulting wear pattern on their incisors and canines is dramatically heavier than the comparatively light wear found on their molars further back in the mouth. Researchers studying actual Neanderthal remains found the exact same distinctive wear pattern: heavily worn front teeth sitting right next to comparatively unworn back teeth, strongly suggesting Neanderthals were doing something remarkably similar in their own daily lives, using their mouths as a kind of built-in vice or processing tool for tasks that went well beyond simple eating and chewing. The consequences of this kind of relentless, accumulated mechanical wear were genuinely serious over time, and this is precisely where the rosy, ancient teeth were perfect narrative starts to crack under any closer inspection. Severe attrition doesn't simply file teeth down evenly to slightly shorter stumps and leave matters there, safely contained. Left unchecked over the course of a full adult lifetime, it can wear all the way through the protective enamel and dentin layers covering each tooth, eventually exposing the sensitive pulp chamber buried inside, the same nerve-rich core that, if exposed in a modern dental patient today, would send almost anyone sprinting immediately to an emergency dentist appointment without a second thought. Researchers studying Neanderthal remains have documented exactly this kind of pulpal exposure occurring repeatedly, along with a genuinely high incidence of chipped teeth, fractured teeth, and teeth lost entirely before death from natural causes, conditions that today would be treated immediately and routinely with root canals, crowns, or straightforward extractions, but that ancient humans simply had to live with instead, often for years on end, with absolutely no relief available beyond whatever grim, silent pain they could manage to tolerate day after day. And ancient humans clearly were in real, sustained pain at times, because the surviving archaeological record contains direct, physical evidence that they were actively, deliberately trying to do something about it, rather than simply suffering in passive silence. A genuinely remarkable discovery at the Cova Forada site in Valencia, Spain, found a Neanderthal specimen with distinctive grooves carved into the surfaces between two of its teeth, grooves that precisely match the recognizable pattern left behind by repeated toothpick use, sustained over an extended period of time. The same individual showed heavy dental wear throughout the mouth and clear, unmistakable signs of periodontal disease, the kind of gum disease that researchers studying the specimen concluded would have caused this particular Neanderthal genuine, sustained pain and considerable discomfort throughout daily life. The interpretation here is almost unbearably human once you actually sit with it for a moment. This individual was hurting badly, didn't have access to anything even remotely resembling modern dentistry, and resorted to exactly the same basic instinct you or I would reach for instinctively today: jamming something pointed between the aching teeth repeatedly, in a desperate, ongoing attempt to find some small measure of relief from the discomfort. This wasn't an isolated one-off case either. Researchers studying multiple ancient specimens scattered across different time periods and entirely different geographic locations have documented this exact same toothpick groove pattern, stretching all the way from the very beginning of the genus Homo through to considerably more recent history, strongly suggesting it was an enduring, genuinely widespread human behavior passed down through countless generations, rather than some isolated curiosity limited to one unlucky individual. And the dental suffering documented in the fossil record didn't stop at sore, inflamed gums by any means. A study analyzing 52 separate individuals recovered from a Moroccan cave occupied roughly 13,000 to 11,000 years ago found that an extraordinary 94% of them had cavities affecting more than half of their surviving teeth, a staggering figure for a population supposedly enjoying the benefits of a pre-agricultural diet. A separate study examining skeletal remains from a South American population dated to roughly 11,000 years ago found that over 89% of the 83 individuals studied had lost an average of 9 teeth each over the course of their lives, with more than a quarter of the sample showing significant jaw deterioration resulting directly from the infections and structural damage that inevitably followed. These aren't remotely the mouths of people living some idealized, cavity-free paleo paradise that modern diet trends like to romanticize. These are real people who, in many well-documented cases, experienced genuinely severe, sustained dental disease throughout their lives, with absolutely no anesthetic available, no antibiotics whatsoever, and no trained dentist anywhere in the picture to help guide them through any of it. This complicated, considerably messier picture gets reinforced even further by a detailed study examining one of the oldest known anatomically modern human skulls anywhere on record, dated to roughly 100,000 years old, discovered at the Kafse site in present-day Israel, and known to researchers studying it simply as Kafse 9. For years, a common assumption circulating in both popular discussion and some academic circles was that early modern humans must have had a near-perfect, evolutionarily optimized match between the size of their teeth and the size of their jaws. With dental crowding and malocclusion, the technical term used to describe teeth that simply don't line up correctly against each other, emerging only relatively recently in human history as some kind of distinctly modern affliction caused by softer diets or smaller jaws gradually shaped by industrial-era eating habits and processed food. The detailed orthodontic analysis conducted on Kafse 9 demolished that comfortable assumption directly and unambiguously. The skull showed clear, well-documented evidence of malocclusion, specifically an anterior crossbite accompanied by a related functional jaw shift, a condition still seen today in roughly 4 to 5% of modern populations worldwide. The researchers conducting the study were refreshingly blunt about the broader implications in their own published conclusions. There is simply no solid scientific basis for the popular idea that early anatomically modern humans had some kind of inherently better, more naturally optimized adjustment between tooth size and jaw size compared to people living today. Crowded, misaligned teeth, in other words, aren't a uniquely modern problem somehow invented by soft bread, refined sugar, and processed snacks. They've apparently been quietly riding along with our species since at least 100,000 years ago, embedded deep within the same underlying genetic and developmental variation that still reliably produces crooked teeth in plenty of ordinary people walking around right now, completely unrelated to diet. So where does this leave the original, much simpler question this video opened with? A detailed comparative study examining Natufian. Hunter-gatherers, who lived in the southern Levant region between roughly 10,500 and 8,300 BC, directly against the Neolithic farming populations who came immediately after them in that very same geographic region, found a picture considerably more nuanced and balanced than either ancient good, modern bad, or even the simpler hunter-gatherer good, farmer bad framing that popular discussion often defaults to. The hunter-gatherers actually showed a notably higher rate of dental attrition and periodontal disease overall, 36.4% compared to just 19% among the farmers who followed them in the same valley, almost certainly reflecting that grittier, tougher, more mechanically demanding diet built around wild foods, raw game, and unprocessed plant fiber that required constant heavy chewing. The farmers, meanwhile, showed a notably higher rate of dental calculus buildup, the hardened mineral deposits that gradually form on teeth when plaque isn't regularly removed, likely reflecting their grain-heavy diet and the resulting shift in oral bacteria that Cooper's later, more famous research would go on to document directly using more advanced techniques. But when the researchers looked specifically and carefully at cavity rates between the two groups, the two populations came out remarkably, almost surprisingly close together. 6.4% for the hunter-gatherers versus 6.7% for the farmers who followed them. A genuinely tiny statistical difference that doesn't support any dramatic, simple narrative pointing decisively in either direction. Rates of tooth loss occurring before death and the prevalence of painful abscesses were similarly close between the two groups as well, with the researchers explicitly noting that the overall prevalence ranges actually overlapped significantly rather than showing one population clearly, decisively outperforming the other across the board. This particular comparison matters enormously for getting the full picture right, because it sits right alongside and meaningfully complicates the much more famous and frequently repeated Cooper microbiome study showing skyrocketing cavity rates specifically after the broader agricultural revolution took hold. Both findings can genuinely be true at the same time without actually contradicting each other in any meaningful sense, because they're measuring somewhat different populations, different specific time windows separated by thousands of years, and different precise dietary transitions occurring in different parts of the world. The honest, complete picture that emerges once you pull all of this research together isn't a tidy, simple story where ancient humans cleanly win on every single dental metric researchers have measured. It's a genuine, complicated set of trade-offs instead. Lower carbohydrate ancestral diets generally did mean meaningfully fewer cavities in many, though importantly not all, of the populations studied carefully across different regions and time periods. But the very same diets, the same hard, fibrous, entirely unprocessed foods, and the frequent, deliberate use of teeth as makeshift tools for tasks well beyond simple eating, produced a different and arguably far more brutal category of dental suffering instead. Relentless mechanical wear, exposed and aching nerves, fractured teeth, and chronic, ongoing pain that absolutely nobody alive at the time had any reliable, lasting way to treat or meaningfully relieve. And ancient humans weren't simply passive victims of whatever dental fate their particular diet happened to deal them either, quietly enduring whatever came their way. There's genuine, fascinating evidence scattered throughout the archaeological record that they were actively trying to manage, treat, and intervene in these recurring problems using whatever crude tools and natural materials they happened to have available to them at the time. The earliest known dental drill anywhere in the archaeological record dates back roughly 8,250 years to a site in Pakistan, where researchers found unmistakably drilled holes in the teeth of at least 9 separate individuals recovered from an ancient cemetery, evidently created using a refined, adapted version of an existing fire-starting drill technique that had been repurposed entirely for a different, far more uncomfortable purpose. Whoever was performing these early dental procedures had apparently figured out how to adapt an already existing piece of technology specifically to address recurring dental problems, representing a genuinely early form of intentional, deliberate dental intervention, thousands of years before anything resembling formal, organized dentistry would emerge as a recognized professional practice anywhere in the broader historical record. Beyond simple drilling, researchers studying ancestral oral hygiene practices more broadly have found compelling evidence that ancient peoples likely chewed regularly on sticks taken from naturally antibacterial plants, similar in function to the neem or licorice root still used deliberately in some traditional cultures today, specifically to help clean their teeth more thoroughly and address persistent bad breath, alongside the simple, well-documented toothpick use already confirmed in specimens like the Cova forida Neanderthal discussed earlier. So did ancient humans have better teeth than we do today? In the very narrow, specific sense of cavity, rates measured directly against the modern industrial diet of refined sugar and heavily processed carbohydrates, the answer leans genuinely toward yes and the underlying biological mechanism behind it. A measurable shift in the population of oral bacteria triggered directly by the arrival of farming and grain cultivation is well documented and broadly accepted across multiple independent studies conducted by separate research teams. But broaden the question even slightly further to honestly include the severe mechanical wear accumulated over a lifetime, the exposed and aching nerves, the fractured teeth, The periodontal disease, serious enough to drive an actual Neanderthal to repeatedly jam a sharpened stick between his own aching teeth in search of relief, and the malocclusion already quietly present in human jaws a full 100,000 years before agriculture ever entered the picture at all, and the honest, complete answer becomes considerably less flattering to the popular paleo diet narrative that loves to romanticize this exact topic at every opportunity. Ancient teeth weren't simply straightforwardly better across the board. They were different, shaped by an entirely different set of evolutionary and dietary pressures, and they came bundled with their own distinct, often genuinely agonizing set of problems that no amount of fibrous, low-sugar eating could ever fully prevent on its own. The next time you find yourself sitting in a dentist's chair, only mildly annoyed about a single small cavity that gets fixed painlessly in about 20 minutes flat with the help of modern local anesthesia, take a genuine moment to appreciate just how dramatically worse the realistic alternative used to be for almost everyone who came before you. Somewhere in the deep, distant past, a real person was quietly enduring a tooth worn down all the way to exposed, screaming nerve tissue, or an abscess slowly and silently draining infection directly into their jawbone, with absolutely nothing available to help them through it except a sharpened stick and whatever grim, patient tolerance they could somehow manage to summon. Day after day after day with no end date whatsoever in sight, and no one coming to help.